Well, should we go ahead and let folks in, Matt, and get started?
You bet, I'll do that.
Thank you, sir.
Everybody's in.
Well, all righty. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us with this week's MU Extension Forage and Livestock Town Hall meeting. My name is Eric Bailey. I'm a state beef nutrition specialist with MU Extension, and I will be serving as the host for today's meeting. Matt Herring will be serving as our co-host, and as always, he's changed his name to ask questions here. So anybody who would like to participate in the discussion can either type questions in the chat and send them to the whole group, or they can send them via direct chat to ask questions here, and the question will be asked anonymously. I'd like to thank anybody who's also joining in by phone or watching the live stream on YouTube. We have posted, I believe this will be our 58th town hall that we've done since the start of March. I just want to thank everybody and acknowledge everybody who's put a heck of a lot of work into to getting this program off the ground and seeing it through. So we will go ahead and get started. Dr. Guinan, I have two requests of you today. One, you're going to tell us that there's rain coming soon, and two, that it's going to dry or it's going to cool down a little bit.
Well, Eric, I'll work on that. You know, I do think it's going to cool down, but we have to get through the weekend first, and hopefully we'll see some better chances of rainfall. But I'll go right into it. And thank you for the opportunity to give a weather report today. And it's been an impressive little heat wave we've been experiencing here in Missouri. It's definitely the most intense one we've seen so far this summer. And you know, there are some people, some lucky folks who have been getting some rainfall. And just to show that over the past couple of days, northern Missouri, in particular northwest Missouri, these are actual COCRAS reports from rain gauge reports, and you can see here in northwest Missouri some very welcome relief. Here in Worth County, there were reports of over an inch, and Nottoway County, a little bit lighter here in Atchison and Holt counties, but any little bit helps. And it's nice to see here in Andrew County there were some reports of over an inch and a half. But overall, things have dried out with most areas of the state not receiving the rains, but nonetheless, some decent totals. In the table here in the lower right does show some of those actual rain gauge reports. And again, mostly the heaviest rain over the past 48 hours has been confined to northwest Missouri. Over the past 7 days since we last met, earlier last week, we did see some other totals that really helpful amounts in parts of west central Missouri, southeast parts, some of the northeast corner here. Saw these lighter greens are anywhere from a ½ inch to the darker greens of an inch or an inch and a half, and over 2 inches in west central sections, and scattered reports across southeast Missouri. It's interesting to know, we've heard all about in the national news, those big totals in western Tennessee, you know, just 100 miles or so to the east of the Boot Hills, some totals anywhere from 10 to 15 inches. There was a 24-hour report of 17 inches of rain. Obviously, that will lead to historic flooding, and unfortunately, there were fatalities associated with that extreme event. Overall, though, these bluer areas show who's been missing out. I put a table here showing the highest reports over the past 7 days. Again, southeast, some scattered areas in southwest Missouri. Again, very welcome relief if you were one of the fortunate ones that happened to be under some of those scattered, isolated thunderstorms over the past 7 days. And what really shows is where the dryness is most intense with this map. It's over the past 30 days. Any areas in green is where things are dry. This is over the past 4 weeks. You know, that's generally less than an inch of rain in some of these greener areas of central Missouri, east central sections, southwest Missouri, some scattered areas of very dry conditions. The reds are indicative of where the rain's been falling over the past 4 weeks. Northeast Missouri, west central, especially over the past week, and southeast Missouri. Look at here in Butler County, there's a little area here, more than 10 inches of precip over the past 4 weeks. So it's a matter of the haves and the have-nots. And again, you see less than an inch of rain in the middle of summer over a 4-week period. Those topsoils are dry, grasses will start turning brown and stop growing. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing some of those impacts from those dry conditions in these greener areas. Lower left shows some of the totals. I talked about that high report in Butler County of Poplar Bluff, over 13 inches. Again, these red areas in northeast and parts of west central Missouri where the rains have been falling. On the lower right, that's where that's where this dryness is really ramped up. And you can see Newton County, Neosho has only had 4,100s over the past 4 weeks. Here in mid-Missouri at the University of Missouri we've had a little over an inch here in Boone County, and just south of here in Ashland, just 7,900. So hopefully we will see some more rain, but I think over the next few days, it's going to be more scattered variety. The upper left, this map does show heat advisories. Again, this has been a fairly intense heat wave over the past few days. It really is going to ramp up today with high temperatures in the mid to perhaps even upper 90s in those drier locations. High dew points in combination with high temperatures is going to create heat indices anywhere from 100 to 110 degrees. So obviously some very uncomfortable conditions, not only for people, but also for livestock and pets. But it's going to stick around for another 24 to 48 hours, these high heat and humidities. This map shows where the action is here. It's a radar map taken about 20 minutes ago. Iowa's under the gun with some complexes of storms. Minnesota, they're actually anticipating another round of severe weather, perhaps tonight across Iowa. That's indicative of the map here in the upper right, showing the highest likelihood of severe thunderstorms extending from southern South Dakota to northern Nebraska into much of Iowa. There's an enhanced likelihood, the highest likelihood of severe weather this afternoon and tonight across northern Iowa. So something to keep an eye on if you're traveling up in that part of, or that neck of the woods over the next 24 to 36 hours. For here in Missouri, I think any chances of precipitation, there's always that possibility that some of those outflow boundaries generated in Iowa can make it down into Missouri and be a trigger or mechanism to fire up more scattered showers and thunderstorms. And that's what we see here in the lower left. There are only 20 to maybe, if you're lucky, 30% chances of showers and thunderstorms impacting the state today. I think the highest likelihood would be across northern Missouri, but hopefully, there's always some hope that some of those storms can make it down into mid-Missouri, but it's not a very good chance. The lower right is the weekend outlook. It does show these temperatures slightly tempering somewhat, becoming still above normal, but not as hot as we're seeing today and perhaps tomorrow. Saturday, there is those day-to-day chances of 20% chances of some scattered thunderstorms, generally highs in the lower to mid 90s, a little bit cooler. They are forecasting a weak frontal boundary to move in from the north, perhaps trigger some more showers and thunderstorms, and with more cloudiness, bringing those temperatures down, perhaps into the upper 80s, but still warm in the mid 90s across southern parts of the state. This is a forecast over the next 7 days of precipitation. Take it with a grain of salt. A lot can happen over a 7-day period, but they are indicating 2 big spots of a lot of precip. But look at this in the upper Midwest. Here in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, anywhere from 1 to as much as 6 inches. I see a bullseye right over north central Iowa, which, by the way, has been in an extreme drought for most of the summer. So that's very welcome rainfall. They've been witnessing this dryness throughout the summer, unlike Missouri, where we actually started out pretty wet from the middle part of June to the middle part of July. We saw a lot of precipitation here in our state. Nonetheless, it does look like this, what you're seeing to the south in the Gulf of Mexico, that is a tropical system. And, the verdict is still out on where the track of that storm will be. Missouri can be recipients of significant moisture from the remnants of tropical systems. And they are indicating, at least according to this model, making landfall in Louisiana and starting to move north, but then making a curve to the northeast and clipping southeast Missouri and with as much as 1 to 2 inches of precipitation. If there's a change in that track, 100 and 200 miles to the northwest, that will bring a lot of Missouri into that heavier rainfall. So something to keep an eye on. The models there's not a good consensus on what that tropical system is going to do. I would say by early next week, Monday or Tuesday, they'll have a much better grasp on the track of that storm. So it's not out of the woods that we could see a shift of the track. And if it is more to the west and northwest, that obviously will impact Missouri with a significant amount of more precipitation. So something to keep an eye on for early next week. This is the forecast for next week. Again, it shows that heat is really kind of sort of hanging on. There's an enhanced likelihood of above normal temperatures persisting into the first part of September. I will say, climatologically, our numbers are starting to decline. Average highs this time of year are generally in the mid 80s as opposed to the upper 80s in early August. And those will continue to decline climatologically as we go into the month of September. So looking into the first part of next week, perhaps that would put high temperatures in the upper 80s for next week across Missouri, perhaps even some low 90s, nothing like we're seeing today and tomorrow. And then on the right, this is somewhat, again, more uncertainty with that tropical system. They are indicating here in greens an enhanced likelihood of above normal precip. That does clip southern parts of the state. And then again, to the north of us, another system perhaps impacting our state with a cold front moving in on Sunday and then on to Monday and Tuesday could bring some better chances of precipitation across the rest of the state of Missouri. Eric, that's pretty much a weather report. Just hang in there. Things will get cooler and hopefully we'll see some better rain chances as we go into next week. Thank you.
Pat, thanks for that report. I always appreciate your insight when it comes to forecasting the weather. So we'll go ahead and move on with today's educational topic. I'm going to be discussing rations for backgrounding calves this fall. And I wanted to start off this conversation with there's sort of an elephant in the room, and that's the fact that commodity prices are high this year. So the one thing I do want to refer y'all to is that we put together a video about this last year, actually as part of the Forage Livestock Town Hall series. It's called Feeding Programs for Growing Calves. It's a little bit more of the nuts and bolts and the basics of if I was going to put a diet together or a program together to feed weaned calves. I would encourage you all to reference back to that video for maybe a little bit more context. Today, I want to focus on more of the economic side of things and a couple of opportunities that I might see out there this fall for folks. Anytime we get into these growing calf rations, I think the place where there's some opportunity for a lot of operations to improve upon is that we sort of take the field of dreams model. If you build it, they will come kind of a deal. And we don't quite maybe put enough effort into really identifying what the key drivers of performance in these animals are. And I know this sounds overly simplistic, but oftentimes a lot of us that are backgrounding calves at home after weaning are just not formulating a diet with enough energy for their animals. Now, when I say formulate, that sounds like something that someone who went to 21st grade is trying to come up with to justify their existence. But in reality, we all formulate diets for all of our cattle. And when you're putting free choice hay out for calves after weaning, that's a formulated diet right there, even though you didn't run it through a fancy Excel program. Or if you're putting adding a little bit of supplement, whatever you're doing, you're formulating a diet. And you'll see here that what I'm trying to depict on the screen is that average daily gain in growing cattle is highly dependent upon the energy concentration of the diet that we put forth for them. In Missouri, it's pretty common for folks to put out a feed supplement in addition to giving calves free choice access to hay. Now, when we build a ration like that, we're allowing cattle to have free choice access to feed or to forage, to hay, and then providing them a small amount of supplement. And so in a lot of cases, the forage makes up a large component of that diet, and the forage quality that's offered to those animals will be a big driver of performance. And so, depending on what your expectations for gain are, and I am of the opinion that we need more folks to think about trying to push backgrounded calves to gain 2.5 pounds a day than I would have been a few years ago. We really have to drive that energy concentration in the diet up, and we need to be, a TDN in the mid 60s, which stands for total digestible nutrients. That's a measure of energy that we use that we can have analyzed in a lab. The other value there is the net energy for gain. A lot of the professional nutritionists will talk net energy for gain, particularly in backgrounding and feedlot type rations. I just wanted to show you all both sides of them. Most cow-calf producers are probably a little more comfortable talking in terms of TDN than they might be in NEG. So those are the two essentially side by side. Now, I've mentioned already that folks are putting together a diet that's hay plus a little bit of grain, and I want to show you what the expected performance of animals under some different kind of management systems might look like. And so what we've got here are the average daily gain and then the feed to gain. So that's the pounds of feed per pound of gain for a calf, and ADG, the greater the ADG, the better. But when it comes to feed to gain, that's a measurement of efficiency. We want fewer pounds of feed needed to put on a pound of weight on these cattle. So we like a smaller feed to gain value. So I've put together 3 sample diets here: grass hay only, alfalfa hay, grass hay plus a commodity mix supplement. And so you can see here that the average daily gain expected with the grass hay by itself is less than 0.7 pounds per day, and it takes nearly 30 pounds of feed per pound of gain. Now, the assumption that I made here is that the TDN of this forage was about 52%. Now, I chose that because one of my colleagues, Gene Schmitz, has done a really nice job of keeping detailed records on fescue hay analyses that he's completed for producers over the years, and he sends those over to me. And tall fescue hay that we put up under kind of standard management practices in Missouri, we're typically going to be making a hay that's in the low to mid 50s from a TDN standpoint. So that's what we would be looking at in a case if we were to just turn calves out in a dry lot after weaning and basically give them free choice access to round bales of hay. Now, I chose alfalfa hay as a proxy for a higher quality forage. 1, because alfalfa is recognizable. 2, it's got significantly greater concentrations of crude protein than just fescue hay by itself. It's closer to a complete feed, although many of us might have the consideration that feeding just straight alfalfa to cattle is asking for problems with bloat and things like that. I still at least wanted to simulate it on paper to show you all that a higher quality forage will lead to greater average daily gain, in this case nearly double average daily gain, along with a feed to gain ratio that's a little more than half of what the grass hay is by itself. That's largely a function of the energy density of the diet going up. You'll notice that the TDN of this alfalfa hay was listed at 58%. The NEG was 0.3. Now, the third piece of this for comparison is grass hay plus a commodity mix. Now, we assume here in this case that these cattle are probably going to eat somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3% of their body weight per day in feed. And essentially, in the grass and alfalfa hay choice or cases, we gave them free choice access. When we add the commodity mix into a feeding program like that, oftentimes what we see happen is a substitution. So those cattle will eat a little less forage when offered the opportunity to consume grain. And so in this case, we're feeding these cattle 1% of body weight per day, which is that's a recommendation that I recommend folks start cattle at roughly 1% of body weight per day if they're going to background them, and then increase that over the course of the feeding period. 5.5 pounds of a commodity mix plus, we assume that they're going to eat about 12.5 pounds of hay in a case like that. Our average daily gain jumped up by another roughly 0.55 pounds per day. Feed to gain decreased another 40%. We increased the energy density of this diet up to 63%. the big takeaway here is that these cereal grain-based diets require less feed per pound of gain, and they promote greater average daily gains. And that's the reason that we've seen the feedlot industry sort of drive towards, high concentrate, dry lot based feeding systems. That, at least from a very objective standpoint, the greatest average daily gains, the greatest feed efficiencies are always going to come from the most energy dense feedstuffs. And so incorporating those back into our backgrounding diets is an important component of this as well. But we really sort of have the issue this year at hand where feed is expensive. And so how do we sort of make sure that we're managing our costs and keeping our backgrounding operation profitable? Well, to me, the first place that you got to start doing that is you've got to look at what the value of the weight that you put on animals is. And so the value is not simply so they would have, or the value, I like to use value of gain when I'm doing these calculations in terms of why should I background a calf. And I want to walk you all through a Missouri Weekly Feeder Cattle Weighted Average Report. I've got the link up above. You can also just Google Missouri Feeder Cattle Summary and it'll be the first thing that pops up. And so this is just a weighted average report of steers, heifers, Holstein steers. This is for the entire state, not just an individual sale barn. So if I was going to do a value of gain calculation on, let's say, taking a 650 pound steer up to roughly 850 pounds, you'll notice that the 650 pound steer sold for $159.32 per 100 pounds, or $1.59 a pound, whereas the 846 pound steer sold for $157.48 per 100 weight. Okay, so a value of gain. Now let's look at the feeder heifers. So the heifers in this case, if we took a 550 pound heifer and made her a 743 pound heifer, her value or her price per 100 weight at 550 is $1 or 147. Her price per 100 weight at 740 is $144.88. Okay, so now let's do a couple value gain calculations right quickly. A value of gain calculation is simply the value of the animal at the greater weight less the value of the animal at the beginning. So I could have sold her at him for 658 pounds for $846, which is just simply 658 times 1.5932. If I kept that animal to weigh 846, I could have sold them for 157.48. In this case, our example, our value of gain was $1.51 per pound gain, or roughly $283.88 in gross revenue. Now, the hard part about this is that you're essentially trying to project out what the value of those animals is going to be in the future. And so you're using data from today to sort of forecast prices. And certainly as the commodity markets have gotten more volatile as the years go by, that becomes a little bit more difficult, but it at least gives us an idea of what the potential gross revenue is before you get into a backgrounding or operation kind of like this. Now on the heifers, going from 551 pounds to 743, there was about $263.04 in gross revenue, or roughly $1.37 a pound in weight gained. And so just to give you some perspective, for every pound of weight that you put on these animals, the steers you got paid $1.51 for, the heifers you got paid $1.37 for. Now the question is that, can I make that pencil financially? So here's a couple of comments about value of gains in general. In general, the value of gain tends to be greater for lighter calves. Now, if you think about it, there are many cow-calf operations. I believe over 80% of the cow-calf operations in the country, numbers of operations, have less than 50 cows in them. Feedlots, backgrounders, stocker operators, preconditioning yards, starter yards, regardless of the terminology we use for the next segment of the beef industry, those tend to be more concentrated segments where there's fewer operations and they're larger in scale. most of them, a large, I would say a vast majority of them, are not set up to necessarily start a lot of light, freshly weaned balling calves. And in fact, we see with, sort of consolidation in the feedlots these days, most feedlots are looking to take on heavier, older animals that have maybe less health challenges associated with them. I say all of that to give you some context such that the value of gain in general tends to be greater for light calves. And when I say lighter calves, I'm particularly talking about 450 pounders versus 550 pounders, or even 350 pounders versus 450 pounders. The majority of cow-calf producers, or a large portion of cow-calf producers in this state and in the country, still are on a spring calving system. And so calves are born somewhere between January and April, and they're weaned in the fall. A lot of calves on the marketplace at once in the fall usually leads to somewhat of a depression in price, just because the supply is so high. Now, the lighter calves in general, though, from, let's say, Halloween to President's Day, tend to have greater value of gain for those than heavier weight calves. So I'm talking about those 350 to 550 pound calves. And I want to give kudos to my colleague Wesley Tucker, who has put together a database of sale prices at auction barns over 10 years that he's shown the data in a previous town hall. I'm just referencing it back for this today's presentation. And the wider the price gap per pound between two weight classes, the lower the value of gain is going to be. So if you see another way of looking at this is a price slide. So if you see a price slide of $15 to $20 a hundredweight between two weight classes of animals within the same, gender, so steers or heifers, that's a pretty big indication that the market is not rewarding as much for putting additional weight on those calves. And so in a case like that, let's say we had 5 weight steers bringing $1.60. We had 6 weight steers bringing $1.30. Now that's a very extreme example that I don't expect to have happen, but in a case like that, there may be little to no value in putting gain to take an animal from a 5 to a 6 weight. Now, I used an extreme example just for sake of argument here in this case, but in general, when you see that price gap widen between two weight classes, value of gain generally goes down. And from my experience background in calves, anytime I do a calculation or projection on value of gain and it's less than $1 a pound, it gets tougher for me to pencil the profitability of a backgrounding operation. And so I worry about that a little bit more. A valuable tool that we have available to us, it's available anywhere, to anyone, is a monthly report that's put together by Kansas State Research and Extension called Focus on Feedlots. This is about as much information as we have widely available and widely circulated on the performance of cattle in a feedlot at any given time. And so the most recent month that they have up is the June 2021 closeouts, and they reported 46,000 cattle on feed across 6 feed yards. These both steers and heifers, it's broken down. You can see the in weight, what the weight they finished at, the number of days on feed, average daily gain, feed efficiency, death loss. But the things I want to focus on more so are the cost of gains, because the cost of gains tell us when the feedlots are making money. And quite honestly, when we're faced with cost of gains that are near to, or in some extreme examples, greater than the value of live cattle, of a fat steer, when those margins get really tight, in general, what the feedlots try to do is they try to bring heavier animals in for fewer days and try to keep them in the yard as long as possible. Now, when they sort of seek those larger animals, that gives us more opportunity to put weight on calves prior to feedlot entry, and it signals that there might be a stronger market to sell some of those heavier animals into. I just want to point out that the cost of gains are projected for cattle that were placed in June 2021 to be somewhere around $1.10 a pound or $110 a hundredweight. With live cattle being about $1.24 right now, there's a relatively tight margin in terms of profitability in the feedlots. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is driven by the corn cost. You'll notice that they have priced in corn at $7.50 a bushel. And so that's a large driver in the issues that we have with, feed costs and feed cost of gains right now in the feedlot. Now, I'm not stumping for the commercial feedlot industry here or trying to sort of deflect us away from our greater purpose today in talking about rations for backgrounding calves in Missouri. But this 1,000-pound gorilla on our backs that are, significant corn prices. Now I get that corn here in Missouri is more like $6.50 a bushel, $6.50 to $6.80 a bushel rather than $7.50 because of our proximity to the Corn Belt, quite honestly. Corn is still king when it comes to pricing in commodities that we might be feeding to beef cattle. And quite honestly, most of the supplements that we would be offering to beef cattle. One thing that I really like to do, and I always encourage folks, if you're getting ready to use some feedstuffs in a backgrounding diet or even supplementing cows, really just any sort of scenario where you might be feeding commodities to beef cattle, is evaluating these feed options, not just based on price, but based on price per unit of energy. So price per pound of TDN in this case. I get folks call me all the time or send me emails with their local feed prices and ask for recommendations on a blend of individual commodities that they could use as a supplement for their operation. Now, there's a couple of points I want to make out in this case. One is that corn of the cereal grains or the grain byproducts, corn is the cheapest, and that's at $6.50 a bushel corn. All of these prices I got recently from calling around to just folks that I know that are in the feed industry in this state and just trying to kind of get spot prices on small quantities of feed. So I'm not talking semi loads. I think one of the mistakes that I've made over the years when I give presentations like this is I go and look up, essentially the semi-load price, and it's oftentimes $30 to $40 a ton underneath or below what a small cow-calf producer might be getting from a local feed store. Now, that's not to say that price is invalid, it's just inaccurate. And so I'm trying to use what might seem to be a little high right now in terms of price per pound, because certainly if you think about soy hulls at 13.5 cents a pound, that's $270 a ton. That's high, but it's not unheard of. Distillers grains at $326 a ton, high, but again, I priced it on a small quantity basis. What I think becomes interesting here is that the price per pound of TDN, you'll notice corn is the cheapest, and then we have on top of that, essentially, so soy hulls and gluten are relatively equal. Distillers grains is the greatest, and then commodity mix is somewhere sort of in the middle. And there's a couple of other options below here that would be somewhere in between corn and distillers grains. The last one I want to point out to you, so we got 35 cent or $35 a ton round, or $35 a bale round bale hay, assuming that the round bale is 1,000 pounds. That price per pound of TDN looks really attractive because it's only 7 cents per pound of TDN, whereas the others are 2x that. But again, remember that when it all comes down to it, it's not just the price per pound of TDN. It's not just the performance. You have to factor in the feed, the total cost of gain that we might have in these animals. And so if it took me, 30 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of gain, feeding straight hay, in a case like that, my cost of gain is going to be astronomical relative to what it might be if it only takes 10 pounds of feed to get a pound of gain using some of these, a blend of hay and some of these commodities. And so hay might look attractive when we're doing a price per TDN kind of a calculation, but put it into context. It you know, especially our lower quality forages, that really is better suited keeping body condition on mature pregnant cows that are not close to calving. That's really the best use for some of our lower quality hays. So just to kind of summarize all of this, the big takeaway is that I think there's going to be some opportunities to maybe put some weight on calves this fall and winter, because if our cost of gains are persistently higher, I know the futures is pricing in corn somewhere in the neighborhood of about 550 to 560 a bushel right now. But there's a lot of factors between now and then. And even still, I mean, we're still talking about, this time last year, we were looking at corn that was less than $4 a bushel. So there's been significant escalation in the commodity markets. And as cost of gains continue to be persistently high in the feedlots, they're going to be looking to offset some of those cost of gains by placing heavier animals into the yard and trying to reduce the number of days on feed. The niche that we have in Missouri is, I think there's an opportunity for us to grow some calves on some lower cost forages this fall. And so I'm just going to cover a couple of options, forage options this fall, just to wrap us up today. Now, Dr. Janowski did a really nice job last week. If y'all haven't watched the YouTube video on the MU IPM YouTube page yet, I highly encourage you to go back and watch last week's presentation, where Dr. Janowski from the University of Nebraska presented some research that they've done over the past 10 years with utilizing cover crops with growing cattle. I think that's a real opportunity for us. And I just kind of want to really briefly summarize a few comments about grazing cover crops. From the data that Dr. Janowski showed and that I reviewed getting ready for this presentation, there's a lot of variability dependent on weather, precipitation, et cetera, and especially variety of cover crop planted. But in general, if I was just going to use a rule of thumb to kind of start running some numbers, we're probably going to grow about a ton of forage per acre. Kind of classic rules of thumb in terms of stocking is that if you're planting some of those winter hardy cover crops that you're hoping to also graze in the spring, you should stock it lightly in the fall, get a little bit of grazing off of it for 45 days or so, and then plan to get the majority of your grazing off of it in the spring once that it's lush and vegetative and going again. So, you know, typically going to stock that at 2 acres per head in the fall, an acre per head in the spring, you know, and a big important piece of that is trying not to graze it out in the fall, not overgraze it so that it doesn't come back in the spring. And that's a lot of that's going to be, you know, highly specific on species. And I thought Dr. Janowski did a really nice job of highlighting maybe some cover crop species that we should be looking at. The next piece of this is that, you know, there was a survey that was put together by Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. That's a government entity or a portion of the USDA. They did a survey of cover crop establishment, and that establishment cost was roughly about $40 an acre. And oftentimes, because cover crops provide agronomic benefits to farms as well, you'll see that the NRCS will subsidize some establishment of cover crops. So if you haven't used them before, there might be some opportunity to maybe get the seed for little to no cost to maybe cut down on that cover crop pricing. The second piece of the cheap forage that might be available to us in the fall that I want to talk about is stockpiled tall fescue. Now, stockpiled tall fescue, I have, to be honest with you, I've sort of got the compliment sandwich for stockpiled tall fescue. There's some good, there's some bad, and some things that we need to be aware of. Multiple animal scientists in multiple states have collected many data on the quality of stockpiled tall fescue. And I love to go back to this slide because it shows TDN and crude protein of stockpiled tall fescue over a 5-year period by month from October all the way out to March. Now, there are dotted lines on the graph that show the TDN requirements for both a lactating and a dry cow. Take that dotted line for the lactating cow and just move it up a couple of ticks, and that would be where I would want to be ideally for a growing calf. What I think is interesting to note when you look at the TDN component of this at the top, it's not until into February before the TDN drops below the requirements to meet the energy requirements for a lactating cow. So there could be, 90 to 120 days of grazing possible at an energy point, at an energy concentration where we should see pretty decent gain from cattle. Same as the case for crude protein below. So we've got both protein and energy are more than satisfactory. Honestly, our biggest risk, and a lot of times with stockpiled tall fescue, is quantity. It's not quality. It's do we have enough to get us by that long? Now's the time of year where we know that Dr. Roberts, I shamelessly borrowed this slide from a presentation that you gave about a year ago on stockpiling tall fescue, and it's actually available in the MUIPM Town Hall YouTube page as well, that shows that, essentially we could have anywhere from around 2,000 pounds of dry matter yield per acre on stockpiled tall fescue. With nitrogen fertilizer, we can increase that, by 75%, depending on the level of fertilization that we provide. I mean, regardless, you'll notice even 40 pounds of nitrogen across years increased the dry matter yield by at least, at a minimum, of 500 pounds per acre. So, and in 1989, the first year, it was more like 750 pounds to the acre. So there's potential to increase the stockpile tall fescue yield through the use of nitrogen fertilizer. But the last thing that I want to do is I want to review the performance of cattle that were grazing stockpiled tall fescue. This review was put together by Matt Poore from North Carolina State University, and it was presented at a national conference a few years ago. Now, apologies, I have to point something out right off the bat. These values are not pounds per day average daily gain, they're kilograms. I didn't have time to get this table remade into this presentation based on other commitments. Sorry. Multiply the values that you see in the table by about roughly 2.2, and that'll convert kilograms to pounds. So he put together, there's 8 different studies here that would show the cattle grazing stockpiled tall fescue with or without supplement. Now let's just focus on the without supplement for now. There's a pretty wide range in average daily gain from 0.22 kilograms per day up to 0.51. So in other words, from about 0.48 pounds per day average daily gain up to about 1.1 pounds a day of average daily gain. The thing that animal scientists have struggled with for a number of years now is that the nutritive value, the TDN, the crude protein of stockpiled tall fescue, should support gains much greater than that, based on just the benchtop analyses. And that's sort of been a quandary for us over the years. Now, all of these studies had a supplemented treatment along with it so that you can see the impacts of what happens if I put out a % of body weight per day in corn, or in a pellet, or corn and soybean meal, soy hulls, gluten feed. There's been a wide variety in supplementation types and amounts across all of these studies. It looks like in general that the supplementation strategies are going to come close to doubling average daily gain in most cases. Now, granted, you'll notice that most of those doublings of average daily gain are going to be in cases where we had over a % of body weight fed. And I would say the only one that doesn't hold up for is the top one, McClure 1977, where 1% of body weight per day in corn only increased the average daily gain by 0.15 kilos, or about 0.33 pounds. All the rest of them show significant improvements. And so if you're going to go down the route of stockpiled tall fescue, I would highly encourage you to consider supplementing the calves out on stockpiled tall fescue, just based on these data here. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. When I'm building a ration for backgrounding calves, I'm really thinking about the protein and the energy content, especially the energy content. The reason that I'm harping on this is that when we use lower quality forages and expect adequate animal performance from them, or growing calf performance, it's difficult to get just because they're the low concentration of energy in these forages. Feed the low quality forages to cows, feed the high quality forages to these calves, especially if you're trying to make this deal pencil. The use of high quality forages, I think, are encouraged under the current economic climate, and will help keep cost of gains under control. And don't forget about sort of knowing where your cost of gains are relative to the value of gain put on animals. In general, another rule of thumb that I like to use is I like to try to keep my cost of gains about 60 to 66% of what the feedlot cost of gains are. So feedlot cost of gains are $1.10 now. Your cost of gains, your feed cost of gains should be 60 to 70 cents roughly per pound of gain. If you're going to go down the route of using stockpiled tall fescue, based on the literature I reviewed, I encourage you all to consider providing some amount of a grain supplement, even though it's expensive this year, just to support performance because of the variability in performance of stocker calves or background calves on tall fescue. So that's about all I've got. Matt, are there any questions in the chat that I can answer up before we wrap up here today?
Dr. Bailey, there's at least two here.
Okay.
First question, could big blue stem hay be considered higher quality?
No. So just to repeat the question, could big blue stem hay be considered higher quality hay? Hay quality is highly dependent upon harvest time, but in general, I do not see any significant advantage to the warm season grass hays relative to the cool season grass hays. And I see a real weakness that I think we have to consider. In general, when we put up warm season forage hay, especially later harvested, lower quality hay, it does not contain the same concentration of crude protein that cool season hay will. So a poor quality fescue hay is still going to be 7 to 8% crude protein, which will meet the requirements of a non-lactating brood cow. Late put up low quality blue stem hay is going to be 4, 5, maybe 6% crude protein. The warm season grasses generally cure out with lower concentrations of crude protein than the cool season grasses do.
Maybe as a follow-up to that, would you recommend people bringing in higher quality hay from outside sources over some of the lower quality hay that they might have locally?
So that's a good question. So, in a case like this, the first thing that you should do is that we can't make these decisions without knowing what we've got. We've encouraged forage testing for a long time, especially if you're going to do something like this. I highly encourage you to test your forage first, know what you've got. Then at that point, I would work with a local extension livestock specialist or agronomy specialist, somebody in extension who can help you kind of think through this, because there's really two options in that case. Do I try to bring in a higher quality hay, knowing that the hay is going to probably be limited in its forage quality ceiling? So even real good hay is rarely going to be above 60% TDN. Or can I more cost efficiently build a diet by providing these calves 1% of body weight per day in a supplement? Now, that's going to be dependent on the price of the higher quality forage. That's going to be dependent on the price of your feeds locally. So you really kind of have to balance those. And like I said, I highly encourage reaching out to us here at University of Missouri Extension. We'd be more than happy to help work that out with you.
One last question, Dr. Bailey. How should I handle implants and ionophores for backgrounding calves?
Okay, so implants and ionophores. So implants are basically given to growing beef calves to increase their rate of gain and their they are one of the products that I highly recommend, and I call them a grand slam product. So for me, if you think about baseball, a grand slam is 4 runs on 1 hit. Implants and ionophores are both grand slam products because they'll return you at least $4 for every dollar that you invest in them. I highly recommend them. Now, understand though, at the same time, especially when it comes to implants, there are folks who would prefer to buy cattle that have not been implanted before. And so you might need to factor that in when it comes down to making marketing decisions. If you're going to keep those calves for a long time though, and in particular, if you're going to implant them with a lower potency implant, probably not a big deal. Ionophores are feed additives designed to make the bugs in the rumen, or to change the population of bugs in the rumen such that it makes the animals utilize feed more efficiently. They typically will improve feed efficiency by 8 to 10%. In fact, there's evidence to suggest it's more than that even. That I highly encourage the use of ionophores. I know a lot of folks don't, especially in a forage-based or cow-calf operation, because the challenge is, how do I get a consistent dose of ionophore into the animals if I'm not feeding them every day? And we know that, pressed blocks and things along those lines, self-fed supplements, the intake is pretty inconsistent. I still highly encourage the use of them just because they're so effective, particularly in forage-based diets. They are wonderful tools that are underutilized in cow-calf backgrounding operations.
Dr. Bailey, I have no additional questions at this time.
All righty, well, I'll go ahead and move on and get us wrapped up here. So again, I've highlighted it several times today, but I just want to point out that all of these videos are posted on the MUIPM YouTube channel. I'm happy to report that since I took this picture over a year ago to put it on the slide, we had 60 subscribers to MUIPM then. We have over 600 subscribers now. So thank you all for everybody who has clicked that red button on the side and subscribed. The benefit to clicking the link and subscribing to the page is that you'll get notifications every time we put one of these presentations up or we go live for one of our town hall meetings. So it's just another reason for your phone to buzz at you and tell you and distract you from whatever you're trying to do. Like I said, this would be the 58th video that we'll have put up there on the IPM page now. So there's a wonderful variety of forage and livestock topics from experts, not just here at MU, but we've had folks from Arkansas, we've had folks from Kentucky, Georgia, Nebraska, Kansas, I think even Oklahoma. We've had experts. We're not just bringing you the finest folks here in Missouri. We're bringing you folks from the best people we know from across the region and across the country, quite honestly. So there's a lot of really good information up there. One quick update on our scheduling. We're actually going to stop doing the weekly presentations now, and we're going to switch to a monthly format. So I believe, Matt, our next presentation is going to be September 14th, correct?
That sounds right.
Yeah, so be aware, we're going to from September through through the winter, we're going to switch to a monthly town hall presentation. The timing will be the same still, so it'll still be Thursdays at noon. They'll be posted on the IPM YouTube channel, and we hope that y'all can join us. So again, thanks for being here today. Thanks for listening in. And is there anything else?
Hey, Eric, just to jump in, I checked my calendar. It's actually September 9, Thursday.
Okay.
September 9.
I'm glad you checked. Yeah. So the next town hall we will not have a town hall next Thursday. The next town hall will be September 9th. So please join us. Have a good afternoon, everyone.